Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are heading into the White Mountains of New Hampshire, September 1961.
Hmm.
We're looking at an experience that didn't just give us the blueprint for, the modern alien abduction story.
Right.
It actually became one of the most revealing chapters in mid-century American history. We are diving into the story of Betty and Barney Hill. They were an interracial couple, dedicated civil rights activists who claimed they had this incredible extraterrestrial encounter.
Yeah.
And our sources today, they're from the Appalachian Mountain Club archives and some deep cultural analysis from Yale University Press. And they force us to ask a bigger question.
Which is.
How did a UFO sighting get so tangled up with the American crisis of trust in government?
And that's our core mission today, really. This deep dive is a shortcut to understanding why the Hills are so central to this history.
Right.
It's not just about what they might have seen. It's what their unique identity and then their later disillusionment revealed about the political landscape of the early 1960s. Their story is a powerful signal of how American confidence in science and, centralized government began to crack.
Okay, so let's unpack who Betty and Barney Hill actually were, because who they were really defines what they expected to happen.
Absolutely.
Betty was a college-educated social worker. Barney was a WWII vet working at the post office. I mean, these were respected, established people in their community.
But we need to be careful with a word like conventional for them, especially in 1961. Yes, they were public servants. They were solid Democrats, part of that classic New Deal coalition, active in a progressive church. But being a prominent interracial couple in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and being deeply involved in the NAACP, that meant they were already pushing against social norms in a pretty big way. They were pioneers.
That's a really crucial distinction. Their activism, their work in the civil rights movement, it meant they already knew how to deal with powerful institutions.
Exactly. They knew how to fight for change through the proper channels.
They supported the government. They expected it to uphold justice and, national security.
This was a time of just overwhelming faith in federal institutions. I mean, look at the numbers. In 1964, 76% of Americans trusted the government to do the right thing most of the time.
Wow, 76%.
Yeah. They saw the government, the military, as competent, trustworthy, entities that solved problems. And that belief, it completely informed their reaction when they saw something they couldn't explain.
They just assumed the state could handle it.
Right. They figured, okay, the state can and will handle this, whether it was from the Soviets or somewhere else.
And that deep-seated faith is the bedrock that just gets completely shattered by the end of this story. So let's get to the road trip itself. They're driving home from a quick, sort of belated honeymoon in Montreal. They leave a diner in Vermont pretty late, hoping to get back to Portsmouth by about 2 a.m.
And this drive takes them through the White Mountains. It's dark. The roads are winding. It's a very lonely, heavily forested part of the state.
And around 10:30 at night, they notice a light, a bright, moving light.
It was moving way too fast, too erratically to be a normal plane. And as they kept driving, it just got bigger and brighter.
And Barney, he's the veteran, the plane enthusiast, right? So he's initially very pragmatic about it.
Yeah, he's trying to rationalize.
He's thinking it must be a satellite that's straight off course, something technical, something man-made. So they keep driving, watching this light dip in and out of the tree line.
But the curiosity, it just wings out. They pull over. Betty grabs her binoculars.
And what does she see?
She sees details that Barney's rational mind just could not accept. A spinning object, multicolored lights, what people back then called a flying saucer.
And Barney's still resisting this.
Totally. He gets back in the car. But then they reach Route 3 near Lincoln.
And this is where it gets terrifying.
The object stops following them and just descends rapidly. It hovers just 100 feet above their Chevrolet Bel Air.
100 feet.
Barney slams on the brakes, grabs the handgun from his glove compartment, and gets out of the car.
What does he see?
He sees this craft. He described it as big as a jet, but as flat as a pancake.
But the really chilling detail is when he raises his binoculars.
He sees figures, gray uniforms peering out from these illuminated windows. He said one of them gestured at him, almost telling him to stay put, or maybe to lower the binoculars.
And he just freezes.
He said he felt completely paralyzed. He couldn't even raise the pistol he was holding, just pure panic.
He runs back to the car.
Sprints back, shouting at Betty, "They're going to capture us." He floors it, just speeds off down Route 3.
And as they're driving, they hear these strange, rhythmic beeping noises.
Yeah, coming from the trunk of the car.
Yeah.
And then this heavy, just drowsy feeling washes over them both. And then nothing. They lose consciousness.
That's the beginning of the missing time.
When they finally, come to, they're miles down the road, much closer to Portsmouth. They pull into their driveway and realize hours have passed. Way more time than the drive should have taken.
And the physical evidence was immediate. It was undeniable that something was wrong.
The details were so specific and unnerving. Their watches had stopped working.
Betty's dress was torn and stained. Barney's shoes, which were normally immaculate, were all scuffed up.
Right. And they found these weird, shiny spots in the trunk of the car that seemed to be magnetic.
So Betty, again, showing that faith in the system, she jumps right into action.
She does. She spends hours researching NCAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. It was the biggest civilian UFO group at the time.
She's treating this like a technical investigation.
Exactly. She even files a report with the Air Force, specifically because she was worried about radiation exposure from the light.
But they couldn't just move past it. The psychological toll was just too heavy.
Oh, yeah. Terrible anxiety, recurring nightmares, intense distress for years. And that eventually led them to a psychiatrist, Dr. Benjamin Simon.
And Dr. Simon decides to use hypnosis.
Right, which is a critical step. Hypnosis in the 1960s wasn't some fringe idea. It was seen as a very viable, scientifically accepted method for pulling up repressed memories.
And under that controlled setting separately, they start to recall what happened during that missing time.
And under hypnosis, the world gets the definitive, chilling blueprint for the modern abduction narrative.
They remembered the UFO landing on the road, these gray beings leading them inside.
And being separated, put on these metal tables for what they described as invasive medical exams.
Both of them recalled these very detailed, very clinical inspections. The beings were taking samples.
Plucking hair, clipping nails, taking skin samples. It seemed purely biological, like they were just gathering data.
And Betty remembered a long needle being inserted into her stomach.
A procedure, she was told, was a kind of pregnancy test.
What's so fascinating is that even though the procedures sound horrific, the beings were described as emotionless.
Like scientific automatons. There was no sense of malevolence, just this cold clinical curiosity.
And this all leads to the most enduring piece of evidence for researchers, Betty's star map.
Yeah. Under hypnosis, she recalled being shown this three-dimensional, holographic-style map by the leader of the beings. She actually drew this complex diagram for Dr. Simon.
And why is that so important?
Because years later, an amateur astronomer, Marjorie Fish, she analyzed that drawing, and she interpreted it as a map corresponding to the Zeta Reticuli star system.
Which is a binary star system hundreds of light years from Earth.
Precisely. This highly specific scientific-seeming detail is where their story powerfully reconnects to their initial expectation of, objective, verifiable truth.
And their experience was immediately launched into the international spotlight, just because of the sheer detail and the physical evidence.
The Hills gave us a narrative that was just so much more robust than anything that had come before.
Absolutely. Before the Hills, alien contact in the media was, either friendly or kind of a B-movie monster thing.
Right.
Their account introduced all the terrifying clinical tropes, the gray beings, the examination table, the missing time, that influence almost every piece of sci-fi, from Close Encounters to the X-Files.
But here's where we connect back to the bigger picture and why their status as civil rights activists is so critical to the sources we're looking at. They went to the Air Force expecting a professional governmental analysis. They thought this was a national security issue. That reflects that 76% trust statistic we talked about.
They thought the government would see it as a potential technological threat, maybe Soviet, maybe something else.
Yeah.
But the Air Force just completely let them down.
The government's whole approach was changing. By the mid-60s, the Air Force, under Project Blue Book, started shifting its focus.
Oh, so?
Instead of treating UFOs as a technological or military threat, they began classifying sightings as a mental aberration.
So a psychological threat, internal to the person seeing it.
Exactly. So the government didn't just deny they saw a UFO. They essentially told this highly respected, politically active couple that they were psychologically unstable.
Their experience was dismissed as a problem in their minds, not something real in the sky.
And that dismissal, both scientific and administrative, was devastating for them. The Hills were all about evidence-based policy, civic engagement. They sought truth through established channels, the NAACP, their church, the military psychiatry.
And when the Air Force basically called them crazy?
It invalidated their entire reality, their very identities as reliable, sane witnesses.
That fracture of the New Deal trust? It became personal for them.
Exactly. And that disillusionment mirrors what was happening all across America in the late 1960s with things like Vietnam and the general erosion of faith in the government.
So the Hills, who valued public discussion of science and knowledge, they were pushed away from those mainstream institutions.
They were forced toward a much looser network, practitioners of what would become the New Age movement, and critically toward a deep skepticism of the government.
This is the surprising final chapter for Betty Hill, especially. In her later decades, she became really vocal about this crisis of faith.
By the 1980s, she wasn't just talking about gray aliens. She was describing strange black helicopters over New Hampshire. She was actively telling people not to trust institutional analysis.
She actually said she had, quote, learned to distrust anyone who offers to analyze anything I find. And she warned that governments exist to separate and divide us.
Her journey is a perfect capsule of how that bedrock belief in federal authority could crumble into profound distrust, even conspiracy, in just a couple of decades.
So their story started with them expecting the government to protect them from a threat.
And it ended with the conviction that the government was the threat,
Yeah.
actively covering up the truth of what happened to them.
So if you take one thing from this deep dive, it's really the dual impact of the Betty and Barney Hill case. They gave us that definitive, terrifying blueprint for the alien abduction narrative. But their personal journey, as civil rights advocates who trusted their government, it shows the fracture of American political and scientific confidence in real time. Their skepticism wasn't born out of some radical ideology. It was born out of profound institutional disappointment.
And that leaves us with this provocative thought. What does it mean that one of the most famous stories of encountering beings from another star system is so inextricably linked to the American civil rights movement and to a fundamental crisis of faith in our own domestic institutions? The real deep dive, perhaps, isn't into the stars of Zeta Reticuli, but into ourselves and what happens to a nation when the institutions we rely on break down.